Good morning. So, today I thought I was going to talk to you about the singleton pattern. And that might not sound so exciting, but I read an article the other day which I thought was kind of interesting. So, now I know this for a fact that the singleton pattern in the programming world is a topic for hot debate, and I thought I'd give it a stab and talk a little bit about my thoughts about it. And it's really it's what I've found using it, and it's really an open type of, well, it's not a question per se, but it's just a suggestion to see if there's any real foundation to the criticisms that the singleton pattern has gotten in the programming community. So to just summarize, the singleton pattern is in essence when you have a single instance of a given class, which means that in memory, during the execution of your program, there's just a single reference to this object. So if you try to instantiate the same object twice, all it's going to do is that it's going to return you the same instance if that instance is already created. And if you're creating it for the first time, then it will create the new instance. So that's the idea. So it's a static class, or, well, not necessarily a static class, but it exists only in one place. Okay, so now we have that out of the way. So from my perspective, the singleton pattern has been used mostly to hold, or rather that's the strongest use case for it in my opinion. It's used to hold information that you want to be globally accessible to everything in the system. Anything that's being created, a good use case, I would say, is for configurations. Maybe if you have a lot of those that you read in at runtime, and then you need those in order to determine certain things about your program. But people use it for more than that. Now, the criticisms that I've heard that are most common is that, you create an object structure that is very hard to test to start off with, because because of this single place that is living in memory. It becomes and I agree, it becomes very difficult for you to, in essence, you have to reset the state between each test run, because unless you do that, well, as you probably guessed, if you instantiate something that only lives in a single place during the entire execution of the program, if you run more than one test, then it's not in a clean state like the second time you run your test. So I agree that that's a little bit weird. And then you have something that is some people do, which is even worse in my opinion, which is that they will do mutations on said singleton. So you might have a property foo, and in one place of the program you read that property, and in another place in the execution you set that property. Now that is, and especially in thread-based programming, that is really dangerous, because if you have people you're sooner or later going to make a mistake where somewhere in the execution of the program you're going to expect that value to be something, and then somebody else from somewhere else is mutating that for you, and all of a sudden you have a bug. So I think it's warranted that being very cautious with this singleton pattern is, it's a strong argument. And there are of course more criticisms that I'm not covering here, but to me these are the most well-founded criticisms. Now, the obvious for me suggestion, and I'm pretty sure there is no way I'm the first guy who has ever said this, but I still think that if I was saying earlier, if you have configurations, I think the singleton pattern makes sense. I mean, if it's a read-only object, I don't see the harm. If you're just reading static data from memory, and you don't really necessarily need to test that type of thing, and that comes into a philosophical question: how much do you test? Do you test everything and so forth? And that's another debate in and of itself. However, what I want to make an argument for is to take a look at flux. Now, for those of you who haven't tried flux, it's a flavor of the pub/sub pattern, and it's been popularized. I don't know if it was invented though, but it's popularized by Facebook. And the idea is basically that you have a pipeline where you dispatch an event of some sort, and then the flux store, if you will, that holds all the data, receives that message with the mutation that you want to do, and then you update that mutation. What's good about that is that if you have that pipeline, you can hook into the dispatching pipe. So basically you ensure that whenever you want to make a mutation on this singleton state, or this state that you have, everybody who is interested in knowing about that, regardless of where they are in the code, is going to know about it. Now, the reason why I think that's fairly powerful is that and this also infers that you don't do, like, you're not allowed to do like store mutations, or like, as I said, foo is equal to something else. Like, on a singleton, you're not allowed to do that. You're allowed to send a dispatch with a message to do that, and the reason is, I hope, clear, because if you're just mutating things willy-nilly without using the dispatch, you're going to not communicate to the code that is trying to listen for any mutations on the foo property, that the property was that it was updated. So why is this important? Well, because if you do something like Redux and you use reducers and so forth, in the case for unit testing, so if you have reducers and you use the Redux flavor of Flux, a lot of that untestability of the store, it goes away, because in my opinion, this is also a philosophical question, do you have to test the fact that the store updated the property correctly, or do you want to test the logic of the actual mutation? Now, I will argue that for sanity's sake, I wouldn't, there are things in the code that are fairly trivial, and I don't see, you can test this. I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I'm simply saying that I think that the most of the value and the most of the concerns about doing this type of having the singleton pattern comes from, this this fear that you, in my opinion, you usually see that people have some method that is tied into some other business logic, and then they have a singleton stuffed in there somewhere, and they're not actually testing the singleton. They're testing the code around the singleton, and they need the singleton in order to to be able to execute the code. So, and if we accept that that's probably the most common case, then as you can see, the test isn't about singleton, it's about the surrounding code. And if you're trying to do this in a flux pattern, as I said, it doesn't make sense for you to test the actual mutation of the store, or the state of the store, as much as it makes sense for you to test that the reducer that does the actual update is doing it in a correct manner. And that becomes very easy if you have the Redux flux pattern. So what I suggest is that if you're not sold on the singleton pattern, and it's okay if you're not, I mean, everybody, people feel different about it, try to make your own implementation of Flux or Redux, and that's, I think, what's beautiful about that pattern. It's very easy. I'm not saying that it's beginner level stuff, but it's a intermediate. It's not that complicated to put together, and what's great about it is that you can actually, because I think that there is absolutely a value in having the singleton pattern. It is a powerful pattern. And I think that if you use it, if you use the flux pattern, which is in essence a singleton, it's a singleton plus. A lot of that criticism I was talking about, untestability and the fear of having shared immutable state, it pretty much goes away. Not entirely, but for the most part. So I just like, that's my 2 cents. Try it out. I have like, for me it's been working very well, and hopefully you'll find the same.